Welcome, everybody, to a brand new episode of La Vida Baseball Live. Happy Monday to you all. I'm Julie Alexandria here in San Diego with Ozzie Guillen Jr. in Chicago and Jennifer Mercedes in New Jersey. Happy Monday, January 18th, better known as MLK Day. And because of that, we want to pay homage to MLK by having a Martin Luther King themed show today. So we have lots to get to. Jen, happy MLK Day to you.
Happy Martin Luther King Day to everyone. What a year to celebrate the great doctor.
Absolutely. Ozzie, do you have any MLK Day memories?
You know, a specific memory, no. I just know that it's a day where, when you come to the United States right away, Dr. King is someone that automatically is taught to you. I think that when everyone talks about Mount Rushmore, I would put Dr. King's probably more famous than a lot of guys that are on the Mount Rushmore of the United States. Just a name that you learn right away when you come to the United States, and it's a super important name. Obviously, gone too soon, but as a guy that when you read about him and you really go in depth, is somebody that probably one of the best human beings to ever walk this earth. Just happened to do it here in the United States, but and then when you really look into it in the world of sports, the correlation of things that were happening at the time and how sports was changing and the revolution that was happening, just a very interesting time. And when you have time to study that, a lot of things that happened in that time that were involved with the world of sports and Dr. King, it's super important. Things that we're still fighting today. That his words and his inspirations are still there, and I'm a big history. I love history, and I love that he's honored because we can't forget what he fought for, and you can't forget history because that's super important to not make the mistakes that we've made in the past.
Yeah, absolutely. And now more than ever, I mean, we're still fighting against the racism and social injustice that were going on in the 1950s and 60s, the same issues that he was fighting for and against. And you look at this country, look at our cities, our towns, and our neighborhoods, and just how divided we are. And here at La Vida Baseball, we want to bring everyone together. It's a true call to unity on today's show, using the universal language of baseball. So let's get right to it. Up first, let's talk about this. I love this. I'm a big fan of Dave Roberts. Congratulations to Dave Roberts, the World Series winning manager 2020. He will be receiving the 2021 Brotherhood Award. So he is being honored. This entire ceremony will be presented by the Martin Luther King Jr. Brotherhood on Friday, and it's a free event, which is really nice. That has to be one of the silver linings, right, to this whole COVID era, is that just the authenticity and the accessibility to major events that you can just click on and be a part of.
Yeah, for sure. And I think that that's something that's going to be happening more and more moving forward, even post-COVID, right? I think people are seeing, like, you know what, people want to be involved and they want to see what's going on. Let's go virtual so that those who can't be there in person can also be a part of it. And congratulations to Dave Roberts, who I just think is one of the nicest, really one of the nicest people that you will ever meet when it comes to baseball. Just one of the nicest managers. I'm so happy for him and the year that he had last season, right, winning the World Series and now being honored in this way. He was also at a time, the first, like right when it was him and Cora at the World Series. They were the two first minority managers. I mean, he's done a lot, and I congratulate him for all of his success.
Yeah, Ozzie, can you speak to the redemption of Dave Roberts? Because if you look at his persona or how he was perceived in the media, in the press, so many people doubted him. So many people doubted. I mean, they nitpicked everything with how he managed, how he constructed his lineups to how he managed the bullpen. And then he goes ahead with the Dodgers with an incredible team, by the way. Put the onus on the team, but of course him as well, winning, the World Series last season. What can you say to his evolution as a manager?
You know what? I think that Dave Roberts is one of those guys that you knew was going to be one of the good ones. But sometimes the biggest worry that I had with a guy like Dave Roberts was when you look like Dave Roberts, you tend not to have the second, the third, the fourth chance. Okay, and that's just a reality of it. Dave is in the minority, and I thought that early on when he would lose with the teams that he had at his command, that he would not be given a second chance, especially with the pressure that comes with being the manager of a team like the Dodgers. The Dodgers, stood by him, which said a lot about them and about what they believed in Dave. And now that he's won, he doesn't have to worry about that so much. But when you're a minority, okay, and you're a manager, you don't have the same opportunities, meaning your runway is a lot shorter, okay, for failure and success. The two journeys are very different. And that was always my word about Dave Roberts is, Dave Roberts is not going to have a 15-year runway to prove how good he is, and that's something that I think that for him, he probably knew that in the back of his mind always. And for him to be able to finally win it, it was huge because, again, the runway is just very different, and the Dodgers believed in him, and now he's a guy that now he can dictate what he wants to do when he wants to do it, and has a chance to be a guy that, in my opinion, could win multiple World Series.
Absolutely. And, when we talk about MLK Day, it's sort of synonymous with Jackie Robinson. You talk about the Dodgers, and it all goes back to Jackie Robinson in a way. And we're all familiar with his journey. But one thing that I was personally not familiar with was that he wrote an op-ed after the passing of Dr. Martin Luther King. And it's on MLB. And it's so interesting because this one passage stood out to me, and I'll read it because he wrote it. And I mean, how often do you see a baseball player write an op-ed? Not that often. More to the point, an African-American baseball player of the day writing for a paper. So here we have him saying, and I'll read this. He says, I have to say how inspiring it was to hear both Governor Rockefeller and Mayor John Lindsay expressing the hope that after the nation's tears were dry, we would not go back to business as usual. Just sort of putting a pin in elevating just how monumental this event was. Jen, what were your thoughts on his op-ed?
Well, when I read this, and Julie, that line also, it just, the entire article was so poignant to today's time that we're living in right now, the political environment that we've been living in since the beginning of this year, right? Almost seems like it's been a few months, but it's only been a couple of weeks. But what Jackie Robinson said in that article about Martin Luther King and his impact in that short amount of time really, really reflects in what we are living in today. And he goes on to say about how government is wondering, is government going to lead the people, or are the people going to lead the government? And I think it's a question that we're asking ourselves right now. Like, are we going to have leaders, proper leaders, and lead us in the right direction, or are we going to let a small fraction of this country lead us in the wrong direction? And I think a lot of that article really does reflect what we're going through. And Martin Luther King, gosh, what would he be doing right now? How is he looking down upon us and the way that we're living in? And Jackie as well, with all that he and Martin Luther King fought for, and to be where we are at, I think that there are two things, right? There is the positive side as far as we have more and more people who are disgusted by what they are seeing in today's day and age. But then we still have that group, man. We still have that group that, for whatever reason, will not accept that we are all part of the same race. We are all part of the human race. And I hope that at some point we do get to that point. But I think the more and more we talk about Dr. Martin Luther King, Jackie Robinson, and all of those who have broken barriers and what they stood for, I think the more that we can educate ourselves on that, the more, I mean, as long as it takes, right? But the more we'll get to that dream that he so wanted to achieve.
Yeah, it's so interesting. You think of, I mean, the reality that both of these men lived side by side in the same era and were making strides in each of their sort of paths. But there's almost a legendary level when it comes to these two men. And here's a quote that I want to also read from Dr. Martin Luther King. He said, quote, Jackie Robinson incessantly raised questions to sear America's consciousness. there are those, black and white, who have challenged the right of Jackie Robinson to ask those questions. He has the right. He has the right because he is a citizen. Jen, to your point, the fact that we are still having this conversation, it is 2021. This was happening in 1962. And we're still having this conversation. We're still asking ourselves these same questions. Of course, Jackie Robinson, African Americans, Latino, any race or creed has the right to play baseball, and that is more commonplace. But the fact that we are still having these conversations of how to proceed as a culture, as a nation, is incredible to me, but also incredibly sad. But Ozzy, to that point, when you think of Jackie Robinson and all he went through, it is synonymous with the journey of Dr. King, isn't it?
Well, I think that when you look at the dates, okay, and I think that people don't look at the dates enough. And the part that I find even more interesting is that these two black men, very, very different political views. Okay, you guys can Google them yourselves, but yet had so much focus on the unity of a race, regardless of their political views. Okay, something that in today's world would have probably never happened, just based on what they thought what a government should look like, which I think is a big part of the problem now. You know, Jackie Robinson breaks the color barrier in 1947. Okay, 47. Dr. King dies in 68. Malcolm dies in 65. Okay, you do the math. That's somebody's lifetime right there. Sometimes when things happen in sports, the impact, we don't realize it, but sometimes it takes so much longer in society to catch up on. And when you're looking at someone like Jackie writing those words, it must have meant so much even more to him, because Jackie feared for his life when he came in and crossed the barrier. It wasn't just about, I'm going to play a game. Is you're doing something that is making people so upset that they don't want you to no longer be on this earth. Okay. And if you're looking at it, when people say, well, just, shut up and dribble or just play your sport, you would have thought in 1947 that racism ended and that no one had an issue, with people of color playing, being combined in the same league. But then 30 plus years later, you have Dr. King killed in 68. Okay. So the time, even though in our world of sports, we were already playing together and we were making steps to changing our league and our future, our society was so behind. And that's where I think now, when I'm looking at the dates and I'm looking at Malcolm's death, Dr. King's death, and I look at sports today, okay, and I look at the way that we treated Colin and the way that, his way of protesting, I think that sports and society they're not on the same time frame. Okay, we're either way ahead of our time than the society really is. And that's something that to me is crazy, because something that we might be hating on an athlete or somebody saying something in the world of sports, 30 years on the road, we say this makes absolutely perfect sense of why we're dealing with this. So I think that for Jackie to write that, he then probably realized, I knew what I was doing was that much more dangerous, because you're trying to change people's mindset, the way that they're thinking. So for those guys to be around at the same time, I think it's something that today affects the athlete of today, because every time that you're playing, Cece Sabathia said it best in his documentary. He said, I knew every time that I took the mound who I was and what I was pitching for. And that's something that, we always talk about, when are they going to get over it? It's been 400 years. It's been 500 years. It's been whatever time frame you got to give it. And it's not, because, when you look at 1968 in the grand scheme of time, it's not that long ago, that a leader like him was assassinated at a time that was so crazy, but yet we're still having those same issues today.
Yeah, but look at Adam Jones goes to Boston.
Correct.
Not even 4 years ago, 3 years ago, 2 years ago, goes to Boston and gets, racial epithets thrown at him.
Exactly. So have we improved? Yes. Has it gone away? No. And I'm maybe 68 and 65 when they were both killed. It was a different time of people had a different approach to the marching and the things that were happening, and it was so new. But it's really felt like a second wind of what they did started it, but it wasn't enough because we thought that athletes were getting money, okay, and they were able to make a living. And again, you're doing your job, but I feel like now athletes are really calling out and saying, yeah, we want to be a part of the league, but we also want to be part of your society. We want to be part, and we want to be welcomed. We don't want to be different.
Right.
We don't want our decisions. So I feel like it's a whole new wave that's coming. And when you look at again, when I talk about the time frames, if you look at Kaepernick today to Kaepernick, 5 years ago, it's everyone's mindset's completely different. I feel the same was for Jackie, because in 47, when Jackie comes in, everyone thought it was a circus, that it was just a ploy for Major League Baseball. Oh, they just want to be different. They just want to do this. But then you go to 68 and you're like, wow, Dr. King just got shot. And, we Jackie Robinson integrated baseball, 20 something years ago. So I think that in that world, when it comes to race, sports, society, I think that sometimes we really have to look at our sports and saying, wow, we are really making a difference. And when I talk about race is one thing, but then it goes into genders, and it's why it's such a big deal when you see women coaches and women general manager and the changes that we're making, because I really think that when you're looking 30 years back, you're going to say, man, that was the beginning of something something positive coming out of this. That's what I think.
I want to touch on a point about Colin Kaepernick, right? I mean, for the past couple of years, he has been villainized as this anti-American, anti-troop, and it just bothers me and it upsets me so much, because after what we witnessed at the Capitol with quote unquote, Blue Lives Matter people and quote unquote patriots, but what I would call, in my opinion, terrorists, beating police officers with the American flag, you want to be mad at Colin Kaepernick for taking a knee, for fighting for equality and against police brutality, and you are going to take that flag and beat a police officer over that? You have no standing. I do not want to hear anybody from that group who believe that Colin Kaepernick was disrespecting the flag while you sit there and applaud what happened at the Capitol. I don't. It's not even political, right? I think anybody who makes it political misses the point, because it's not political. This is about a group of people who, like Martin Luther King fought for, who just don't get it, and they are filled with hate. They have been radicalized, but when you sit there and you attack somebody like Colin Kaepernick, and you attack players, baseball players who decided to take a knee and have decided to speak up and speak out on the issues and why it is that they have lived the way that they've lived, and why it is that they feel the way that they feel. When we see what happened at the beginning of this year at the Capitol, everything that Martin Luther King and Jackie Robinson have fought for, it's just like, I don't even know how to articulate it anymore, because I'm so tired of trying to articulate how we feel and how we felt. And then today on Martin Luther King Day, when you think about what happened, it almost feels like it was just the bloody Sunday, right? That's what it was called? When, right? Like, it feels like that.
Well, you can't celebrate Martin Luther King Day and as an athlete or as a human being, and think that any protest from any athlete is wrong. Okay, that defines the purpose. It breaks it down, and it makes no sense. And that's what I think, that when you're looking at athletes, okay, we try to hold them to this higher standard of, because they play on a sports team or they represent your team, that you have to understand what they're going through as a human being and as a person. And I keep telling people this. Right now, it's African American players, and they have their issue. But a year from now, it could be Latino players. Mm-hmm. And 3 years from now, it could be Caucasian players. We cannot tell these players what they can and cannot feel as human beings. Okay. And they need to be able to express themselves in that way. And I feel like that's what Martin Luther King stood for. Mm-hmm. His words, that's what it meant. And that's when we compare it to Jackie. That's what Jackie made it possible, of you can express yourself in this game of baseball the way that you want to express yourself, with your color of your skin, the way that you carry your way, the way that you play the game of baseball. Those are all things that are sometimes we forget. And that's what I think those two gentlemen wanted us to be able to do today, of it's okay for you to be yourself, and you will be accepted in our league and in our country. That's what I think in general. And for me, that's what it means to me, is that we have the freedom to do what we want and say and feel safe to express ourselves before a game and as athletes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, when it comes to Colin Kaepernick, I actually asked my husband the other day, did Roger Goodell, the commissioner, of the NFL, did he ever make a public apology? Like, I couldn't remember, because if so, and my husband said yes, that he did. Well, I
Yeah,
wasn't aware of it, and more should have been made of it, is my point. And I think collectively everyone owes him an apology, because it was never about the military. It was never about blue lives don't matter, or
yeah.
these men and women fighting overseas, I'm disrespecting the flag, or I'm not a patriot, which, by the way, that word has been completely taken out of context. But to me, what he stood for, his bravery, should be commended. And I hope to see him playing again at some point. What I am interested to know is, over the summer, with all of the protests that encompass the Black Lives Matter movement, we saw with the start of the abbreviated 60-game season in MLB, and we saw certain teams, almost all of them, certain players on those teams take a knee, hold hands, do something to honor the Black Lives movement, Black Lives Matter movement. And even on the back of the pitcher's mound, if you remember, there was a BLM that was stamped into certain ballparks, pitcher's mound. I'm wondering if that will roll over into the 2021 season. Will we see more of that? Will we see an extension of that? Or is that something that will just be sort of, I don't want to say forgotten, but not sort of paid attention to? Jen, do you hope to see guys honor, or maybe perhaps it takes on a different
I
a
think it may
different look?
take on, yeah, I think it may take on a different form, right? I think that we understand what kneel. I mean, if players continue to want to kneel, that's fine, and whatever else other players want to do. I think the bigger thing is Major League Baseball and honoring Martin Luther King's memory and legacy, same as Roberto Clemente's memory and legacy. I think you really have to dig deep. It's not just about saying, Black Lives Matter. It's not only about, putting an emblem or putting a patch on. It's not only about that. I think you really have to, especially after this month, especially after this month and what we're seeing in the division in this country, we all know that there is a large portion of that group, that hateful group, that is also a fan of baseball, right? So how do you address these fans? It is an important conversation. And are you going to allow money to talk, or are you going to allow morals and ethics to dictate the way that you run this season, and the way that you deal with players being accosted and employees? I mean, it's not, and sometimes it doesn't just happen on the field. There's things that happen outside of baseball games. And so I think it's a deeper conversation for Major League Baseball. It's not only about, oh yeah, Black Lives Matter to us. Yeah, we put up a flag and we put up a patch. It's not only about that. It can no longer be, and we talked about this all last season, it can no longer be about just saying it. And we need to see you put words into action. And you know what? You need to look into those big donors and sponsors and who you are donating to. I know that we like to try and separate politics, and everybody has the freedom of supporting whomever they want to support. But I would find it really, really difficult this year for fans to not look up who teams are donating to, which political parties they're donating to, and not question where their hearts lie after the way that we have lived just this past month. So Major League Baseball and leagues across, and we saw Bill Belichick deny or not want to accept the Medal of Freedom, which I think, because of the political climate that we are living in right now, he understood that although it is an honor, right now it was not the moment to accept such an award from such an administration, right? I think that he understood that. So I think more teams and leagues need to do the same and look at, say, how are we connected to this? How do we disassociate, and how do we not continue to enable it?
Mm-hmm. Well, with so many players and their political leanings kind of intertwined, it is always wonderful to see players take action and to take a stand. So that brings us to our next topic. 2 years after Dr. King's death, an all-star game was held in his honor. They called it the East-West Major League Baseball Classic. It was an homage to the old East-West All-Star games that were held in the Negro Leagues, and more than 30,000 fans attended it. It was an amazing celebration to honor his name and his legacy. Joe DiMaggio managed the East, and Roy Campanella managed the West. Always wonderful to see athletes take the initiative and to really get involved, because these guys felt that they had to do something. They wanted to do something to honor his name, his legacy, when the entire world basically stopped after he passed away. So wonderful to see them taking that initiative.
Awesome. I thought that when I read this article, I was like, wow, how cool would it be if we did some of that today? And Ozzy, I know you've brought up the White Sox have done something similar, right? And you've said that you wish that they brought back some of those games as far as honoring the Negro Leagues and stuff. So I think
they've done it. So to the last question and to this one, I think that for me, I don't need a BLM logo behind the mound. I really don't. If they want to have it, awesome. But I really think that what we got out of this year, I have a thought in my head of like a picture, and it's when Joey Votto had the VLM shirt and he came out and said, I understand and I know my teammate better. Okay. Being in a clubhouse for half of my life, you grow up and you realize that people are there and they're friendly, but they don't know much about one another. Okay. There's racial tensions, one can say, not racism, but you just really don't know. You don't care. You don't pretend. You don't want to search or ask. And I think that in today's game, I think that after this movement, I really hope that for players that are on the field, that they get to understand their teammate. Okay. And for a player to take a knee, before you judge them, you ask them, why are you doing it? Tell me, are you okay? Are you really okay? If you're in a city and a player gets heckled, let that player know that you do have their backs. Okay. I mean, I really want that, as much as you protect a guy when he gets thrown at by a pitcher, that you make sure that that player, no matter who the player is, his sexual orientation, the color of his skin, his political view, anything that comes out, that he feels comfortable enough in that clubhouse that he's backed up by his teammates, because that's the first sign that the organization is going to back you up, that the fan base is going to back you up, and that everyone's going to back you up. Because had the 49ers at that time when Colin Kaepernick took a knee, had the whole team done it, the fan base would have not turned against the team. They would have said, this is deeper than that. And that's what I thought when I saw Major League Baseball doing that teammates, guys taking a knee that I would have never thought about taking a knee, guys doing something as simple as putting an arm on a guy, while he took a knee, showing him that there was support there. I feel that now in the world of baseball, in the clubhouses, we're having those conversations. Hey, are you okay? And not just with African-American players, with Latino players, with players that are dealing with things off the field, like substance abuse. We are more united in the clubhouse more than ever. And I really want that to keep growing that way, and for players to feel comfortable and say, are you okay? Because I think that it's only going to benefit the game, and it's going to benefit the way that people look at the game and view the future of it.
And Ozzy, to that point, right? Like you've grown up in the clubhouses and you've seen it. And I think from last year to this year, we are going to see, unfortunately, maybe a little bit more of a division between certain players, right? Because of the way that this year has been, you tend to know who supports who. And I think that conversation needs to continue to happen in clubhouses. I mean, you have Sean Gilmartin, right, who is Kaylee McEnany's husband. I would like to know, what conversation goes on in that clubhouse, and how do you push aside what's happened and move forward this season if you're in that particular clubhouse? There's so many questions. And I can only imagine the players and having to interact with one another. How do you put those feelings aside?
It's going to be hard, and it's going to be something that can make it. And again, it goes back to, I think that you need to find the unity of, regardless of your political views, regardless of your skin color, even if your political views are different, because again, political views are the same, might be different, and you might look the same to someone. It's how do you have those conversations about caring about what the person's going through, and knowing, why are you doing this? Why are you saying this? What did anybody ask Colin, for example, why he was protesting? You know, did any of his teammates say, you know, why are you doing this? Are you trying to do this because of an attention? And I feel that in the world of baseball, where everything was a taboo, and you didn't want to ask your teammate, why are you doing this? How do you feel? How's it going? I feel like now players are being more welcoming to one another, and I feel like that's something that you can grow on that, because you know we've dealt with way harder things. You know, we've dealt with Jackie being the first colored person in that clubhouse, and the reason that Jackie gets to beat Jackie Robinson is because number one, he had the courage, but number two, his teammates said, we're going to protect Jackie at all costs. And that's something that in baseball especially, you protect your teammate no matter what, because he wears that jersey. So I feel like you should protect them in any shape, form, no matter what, as your teammate, not just on the field. And I hope that that's the new mantra in baseball moving forward.
All right. Well, speaking of baseball, moving forward, our last topic here. Last year, 2020 marked the 100th anniversary of the founding of the Negro Leagues. So if you can imagine, 100 years, it took that long till today. Now, Major League Baseball has announced that they are going to alter the status of the Negro Leagues in order to incorporate Negro Leagues statistics, into a historical record in which they did not participate. So, is this a step in the right direction, at least to recognize the fact that these men did compete at this level? Their stats should be recorded. And of course, not to deny the fact of how MLB did segregate back then.
Yeah, I mean, kudos to Major League Baseball, right, for doing this. It's almost and like really it took you this long to do so, but at the same time, like this article mentions, there's so many things, so many ways that Major League Baseball affected the lives of players, of Black players and Black employees, and at the same time, it's like they didn't really need Major League Baseball's approval or for them to be recognized as a major league status, right? Like they were all great players, and they didn't need Major League Baseball to come over and say, "Okay, guys, now you're official."
Mhm.
I feel like that's kind of like, it's almost like a backhanded compliment, right? when you look at it, think kudos to Major League Baseball for doing it. But like I said before, there is a larger conversation that needs to be had around it.
I think that it was great because when you talk about history and numbers and you refer to players from the Negro Leagues, you said, oh, he played in the Negro Leagues. You wouldn't say, oh, he's a Major League Baseball player. I think changing that status, they get into the world of your numbers compete with the Major League Baseball numbers. What I would love to is, and a lot of teams have done it, is embrace, because one thing that has been kept out of a lot of the history is, what did we in Major League Baseball, what did we benefit from the Negro Leagues? From the way that business was conducted, the way that teams were built, the way that the game was played. The Negro Leagues brought a lot of things that made the modern day baseball game what it is today. You know, stealing of second base, bunting, moving the guy over. You know, when you're doing marketing and branding, they were way ahead of the curve. That's not an opinion, that's actual fact. Just because they had to do things a little bit different, and the game benefit from a lot of that. And I think that you needed to include them in that part of history, because they did things that the game benefited from to grow it to what it is today. And I really love, you know, if your team has a history with the Negro Leagues, make sure that you show it. You know, if your team was founded on the foundation of a Negro Leagues, you know, make sure that people know about it, because it is part of the game. And I think it's part of, you know, what the game that it is today. And without that league, we're not at where we're supposed to be right now. Because talking about development, imagine having a place where players could develop of a certain color for you know, 50, 60, 70 years. The detriment that it could have to the sport. We're worried about right now about guys sitting out for a year. Imagine 50 years. So the Negro Leagues is a huge part of what Major League Baseball is able to do today. So that's why they're honored, and it was time and well-deserved.
And they were also really advanced in how, I mean, you had female owners, right? You had women leaders in the Negro Leagues. So I think discussing and highlighting those women and those leaders who played a large role in the Negro Leagues and in baseball, right? I think that we have to speak on and highlight all of those people who worked in the Negro Leagues. You also have to though address, how segregation killed the Negro Leagues and Negro businesses and all of that. So I think it's a difficult conversation to have sometimes for some people, but it's history. And when you talk about it, you learn and you grow and you honor at the same time. And I think that that's a lot of what Martin Luther King stood for, is honoring the legacy of our ancestors and fighting for equality, but also just acknowledging, who we are as a people.
Absolutely. Well said, Jen. And that is, case in point, the entire ethos of today's show. So thank you, everybody, for joining us and for joining in conversation. We hope to continue the conversation. Leave us your thoughts and your comments and opinions. We would love to hear them on this and all of our topics. Thank you so much for watching, everyone. We'll see you next time.